for terrorist attacks and social engineering sorts of things, it's, I think, just I don't know for sure because there's so much that's an unknown about time, but I have a tendency to believe from our work that it is literally X versus Y equation relative to the amount of energy involved in order to make changes. And that would really be the only point to knowing.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a different animal than natural disasters.
Yeah, and if you knew that, there was going to be, say, a giant sandstorm and thousands of people might be affected, well, a sandstorm is a natural disaster. If on the other hand, you suspected that there was going to be a gang attack or something on a small group of people or even a large group in the form of terrorist attack and so forth, there's only so much you can do in the complexity of our planet towards altering that view.
Well, there's the consciousness thought component. You just cannot really change it when there's a huge, and I don't put it in mathematical terms, but if the world at large, the vast number of humanity thinks this is the way the world is and this is reality, a few people are not going to change that.
Right. It's an awful hard boulder to push back up a hill, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we're like little ants, keep pushing a little boulder.
Yeah, and sometimes it works. Sometimes we can actually do things. So we've really helped people out with the natural disasters. One of our primary subscribers from way back when, about 8 years ago, his wife thinks we're just weather gods here because we warned her about 6 weeks ahead of time that some major flooding was coming to Australia, and they ended up wanting to move back to China anyway. They're Chinese. But they got out about 6 weeks before her then house would have flooded out, and when it finally did flood, the water was up to the second floor, so she would have lost everything. So we are able to make some changes that way. We've also done some in the sense of alerting people that, the economy is going and that the dollar is really in a dire way. And in spite of anything you may see today or tomorrow or the day after, the background of what's going on in the dollar should be extremely frightening to people. Now, there we get back into the emotional component of it all. We're not out to create fear. There's a number of sites. If you want to be afraid, there's tons of sites on the internet to go and read stuff that'll make you afraid. Our point is to say, well, it's neither good nor bad. It just is. And how we react to it is where the emotional component comes on in, but we have control of that attitude. And yes, the dollar is dying. And yes, the American economy is going into a huge depression that will make the previous depression look like a small starter event, a little amuse-bouche for our big meal. And the future for the United States and all of its people could be viewed as very dire. But in the same time, it's a period of transformation. And I personally find that very exciting, because here's our opportunity to use our little bits of energy as little ants out there and nudge the boulder as it rolls along a bit to try and get into a different track that perhaps is more harmonious with the planet and will yield better results, because it's going to be rolling no matter what. And so as long as we know that this is the case, we need not fear. We don't have to buy into the power elites and their version of how things are going to go, and we can alter that for ourselves, and hopefully those ripples will spread out and we'll push the planet in an Aikido sense. We'll roll them over into a new perspective.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And as in Aikido, keep the end result. I mean, you see the foe already on the ground before you even defend or deal with it. And I think that is part of it. We heard this so much. Where your mind goes, your body will follow.
And that's very, very key, too, because, that statement alone, where your mind goes. Now, let's also imagine that, and it's not too hard of an imagination effort at that either, that all of our planet is one open mind being fed information through the mainstream media. So someone out there is controlling the mainstream media, and in that effort, they're attempting to control our collective mind, however much we all decide to share individually. But basically what they want to do is they want to direct our mind as to where we should all go. And as a result of that, if you disagree with it, there's many different approaches to disagreeing with the mainstream media, including just turning it off and never listening to it. But then there's also the other approaches of being able to use what is released in the mainstream media as a guide to where they would like you to go. So in that sense, it forms like strategic analysis if you're opposing their particular viewpoint. And that's kind of what we have to do, I think, is we have to look at the symbols that they're putting out there and deciding where they're trying to get us to go to in our rolling, and then decide that we don't want to roll that way. And the minute that we do that in a large enough collective, and it actually needs not be that large, then things radically change. For instance, I read this very nice analysis that said that the American Revolutionary War was actually won, and I believe they stated in 1771, when 2% of the American populace at the time had made it up in their own minds that a revolution was coming, and that the war itself was merely playing it out, but that essentially it had been won at that stage because they'd had 2% of the populace, and that was all that was required. So, and when we actually, by the way, when the 1776 rolls around and we actually get into that level of confrontation, barely 5% of the populace was actively involved. There may have been 60% support for the action, but really only 5% of the people were out running around causing problems for the British. So, applying that same level of knowledge, we can say that, well, we know, for instance, the Chinese are desperate to put at least 20% of the Han Chinese racial stock in any occupied province, and that's why they go to the trouble of the displacements and repositioning of their populace all the time, and that's to maintain a particular level of control, because they suspect that less than 20% Han Chinese will make that province likely to rebel, and they'll lose it. And the Romans followed this plan, and so on. So we can extract a number of very nice clues from all of this, that really, if we get 5 or 6% of the populace that is actively pursuing the agenda of change, then it's almost a de facto occurrence. It's just a matter of waiting for it to all blossom. And we also know that if there's less than 20% of a garrisoning force, you can't garrison a country. So if we just assume that the United States had, say, 300 million in there, then we're looking at having to have 20 and 30 million people involved in the garrisoning of the other 300 million. About 15 million for active garrison, and then about 15 million in supporting troops and logistics. And so the idea that, for instance, that I'm sure you'll see internet sites where they say, basically, if you read through them, it says, worry, worry, be afraid, 22,000 U.S. troops are going to be brought back in full battle gear, ready to patrol the United States and clamp down on all of you people that the government doesn't like. And it's like, okay, I can see that they're right. Their data seems to suggest that indeed is what the military is doing. But 22,000 troops in a country our size? No, it's not meaningful. In the size of Iraq, it wasn't even really meaningful. We didn't have anywhere near the number of troops on the ground for a long time to control the situation. And the only way we're controlling it now is by slicing and dicing the whole country up, something that just is not feasible within the United States. So the idea that we're going to end up with a occupying force of United States soldiers and a weird kind of take on fascism, it may indeed be the plan of the powers that be, but we can also state flat out that unless the populace is actively goaded in through their mental perception into fear, it's not going to work.
That is totally key. Because we're seeing signs of it already, in little bits and pieces there, that it's one of the symbols. I think it's one of the clues of what they want. They want to instill a greater amount of fear because it seems that is what best controls large numbers of people.
Sure. And the individual is not controlled by external forces, but only by the emotional load on their own mind. And so they try and keep you rattled and unsure, semi-hypnotized, and really falling into certain negative emotions. And they use patriotism, spectacles, in the form of, the big NASCAR races or big football games, that sort of thing, and the fear mode of, be afraid, better watch out, we're going to have 3,000 battle-hardened troops here in full battle-rattle gear, and you hear all these nasty words associated with it, basically saying, watch out and be afraid. And it's like, no, if you look at it realistically, even 22,000 American troops, I don't know how many of them you could get to actually enforce through brutality, any kind of laws or sort of coercion against the American people. Half of them, I would think, would be unwilling at best and might sort of halfway go along with it just so that they wouldn't get any trouble. But even if you had 22,000 of them intent on being the nastiest fascists anybody had ever seen, all that really does is precipitate the point where several millions of people decide that's enough. And we stop doing this sort of thing. Just like Gandhi said, it's not possible to govern a country of any size without the consent of the governed.
Mm. So the greater the fear throughout the masses, the less resources it takes to do the next move.
Yes, and we see this constantly. If you wanted to do a sweep, which we do all the time, of government websites, the amount of words that are into the bespoke